Chapter 34 of Ticonderoga by George Payne Rainsford James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 34. Very different from the array of Abercrombie's army was the march of the Oneidas through the deep woods on the western side of Lake Horicon. Far spread out and separate from each other, they pursued a number of different trails in profound silence, and in single files of not more than 20 or 30 each. And yet, with what seemed a sort of instinct, each party directed its course unerringly to one particular point. They knew the spot they were to strike, they knew the time they were to be there, and at that spot and at that time each little band appeared with its most famous warrior at its head. Thus, in the small savannah where the poor negress, Sister Bab, had found the advance guard of the whole nation, nearly 600 warriors of the Children of the Stone assembled on the night of Saturday. Dressed like themselves, with tomahawk and knife in his belt, and moccasins upon his feet, appeared Walter Prevost, distinguished from the rest by his fair skin and flowing hair. The sports of the field, the wild life he had led for several years, and even the hardships he had lately suffered, had fitted him for all the fatigues of an Indian march, and rendered a frame naturally strong, extraordinarily robust and active. Ignorant of any danger to those he best loved, rejoicing in deliverance from captivity and the peril of death, and full of bright hopes for the future, his heart was light and gay, and happiness added energy to vigour. The hardy warriors with whom he marched saw with surprise and admiration the son of the paleface bear difficulties and fatigues as well as themselves, and come in at the close of the day as fresh and cheerful. The fires were lighted, the rifles piled near to each separate band, and the food which they brought with them cooked after their fashion and distributed amongst them. But the meal was not over ere another small band joined them, and Black Eagle himself passed round the different fires, till he paused by that at which Walter was seated. None of his own people had taken any notice of his appearance. Once or twice one of the warriors indeed looked up as he went by, but no sign of reverence or recognition was given, till Walter, after the European fashion, rose and extended his hand. "Thou art before me, my son," said the chief. "The wings of the Black Eagle have had far to fly. I have visited thy father's lodge, and have followed him to the new castle at the midday end of Horicon." "My father!" said Walter in great surprise. "Was he not at his house?" "Nay, he is a war chief with the army," said Black Eagle. "Then where is Edith?" inquired the young man. "Did you leave the Blossom with her?" "I left Otetza at thy father's house," answered the chief, "but thy sister was not there." "Where was she, then?" asked Walter with some alarm. "I know not," answered Black Eagle, and was silent. "Perhaps he has taken her to Albany," rejoined the young man. "But you saw my father. How did he fare?" "Well," answered Black Eagle, "quite well, and he gives thee to Otetza. The Blossom is thine." "Then Edith is safe," said Walter in a tone of relief, "and my father's mind must have been relieved about me, for he could not be well or seem well if either of his children were in danger." "The red man feels much as the white man," answered Black Eagle, "but he leaves tears and lamentations, sighs and sad looks to women and to children. Where is the Nighthawk and the warriors who were with him?" "They are on before," replied the youth. "We have not seen them, but their fires have been lighted here." No further questions were asked by the chief, and walking slowly away, he seated himself with those who had accompanied him, to partake of the meal they were making ready. Few words were spoken amongst the various groups assembled there, and some 20 minutes had elapsed when one of the young men seated at the fire with the Black Eagle started up and darted away toward the north like a frightened deer. No one took any notice, and several soon after composed themselves to sleep. The others sat round their fires, with their heads bent down almost to their knees, and the murmur of a few sentences spoken here and there was the only sound that broke the silence for nearly an hour. At the end of that time 2 young warriors on the north side of the savannah started up and listened, and shortly after several of the Oneidas who had rested in the neighbourhood of the same spot the night before, were seen coming through the long grass and crossing the tiny brook which meandered through the midst. Led by the young messenger who had lately departed to seek for them, they glided up to the fire of the great chief and seated themselves beside him. The conversation then grew earnest, and quick and eager gestures and flashing eyes might be seen. The great body of the Oneidas took not the slightest notice of what was taking place around the council fire of the Black Eagle, but Walter watched every look with an indefinable feeling of interest and curiosity, and after much discussion and many a long pause between, the chief beckoned him up and made him sit in the circle. "Thou art young to talk with warriors," said the Black Eagle when he was seated. "Thy hand is strong against the panther and the deer, but it has never taken the scalp of an enemy. But the daughter of the white man Prevost is my daughter, and she is thy sister. Know then, my son, that she is in the power of the French. The Hononco, whom we have expelled, they are wolves, they have taken her, they have run her down as a hungry pack runs down a fawn, and have delivered her and themselves into the hands of the enemy. The muzzles of their rifles have fire for our bosoms, their knives are thirsty for our scalps. Be not a woman who cannot hear with a calm eye or limbs that are still, but sit and listen, and then prove thyself a warrior in the fight." He then went on to repeat all that he had just heard from the chief who had succoured the poor negress on the preceding night, and all that had been done since. "Our Nighthawk was right," he said, "to send word that we would deliver thy sister, for she is a daughter of the Oneida. The story also of the dark cloud is true, for the children of the stone have caused search to be made, and they have found the horses that were lost and the body of the man they slew. They scalped him not, it is true, for what is the scalp of a negro worth? But the print of the tomahawk was between his eyes." "Let me have a horse," cried Walter, "and I will bring her out of the midst of them." "The swallow flies faster than the eagle," said the chief, "but where is his strength? Listen, boy, to the words that come forth from many ears. Thy sister must be delivered, but our brethren the English must know of this ambush, lest they fall into it. So too shall she be saved more surely. Draw then upon this paper the history of the thing, and send it to the great chief, thy friend, the Falling Cataract. I will find a messenger who knows him. Then will we break in upon this ambush at the same time with the English, and the scalps of the Hononco shall hang upon the war-post, for they are not the children of the stone. They spat upon their mother. One of the horses, too, shalt thou have to save thy sister out of the fight, if a thing with 4 feet can run easily in this forest. "There is a great trail from the setting sun to the place of the sounding waters," said the Nighthawk. "A horse can run there as well as a deer. It passes close by the back of the hiding-place of the Frenchmen." "Let me hear," said Walter, mastering his emotion and striving to imitate the calm manner of the Indians. "Let me hear where this hiding-place is and what it is like. The white man, though he be but young, knows the ways of the white man best, and he may see light where older eyes fail." In language obscured by figures, but otherwise clear and definite, the Nighthawk described the masked redoubt of the French and its position. Ignorant of the ground around the fortress, Walter could form but an insufficient judgment of the spot where it was situated, but the form and nature of the work he comprehended well enough. He mused in silence for a minute or two after the chief had spoken, giving the Black Eagle good hope of his acquiring in time the Indian coolness, and then he said, "It would be better for us, while the army attacks the redoubt in front, to take it in reverse." "What meanest thou, my son?" asked Black Eagle, for Walter, still busy with his own thoughts, had spoken in English. The young man explained his meaning more clearly in the Iroquois tongue, showing that, as the enemy's position was, probably from want of time, only closed on 3 sides, it would be easy for an Indian party, by making a circuit, to come upon the rear of the French, unless some considerable body of natives were thrown out upon their western flank. But the Nighthawk nodded his head slowly, with a look of approbation, saying, "The Hurons are dogs, and creep close to the bowl of their masters. They are all within the stones or the mounds of earth, except those watching by the side of Horicon. The nighthawk has skimmed over the ground toward the setting sun, and there was no print of a moccasin upon the trail." "Thou hast the cunning of a warrior when thou art calm," said Black Eagle, addressing Walter, "and it shall be as thou hast said. We will spring upon the back of the game, but let the falling cataract know quickly. Hast thou the means? He will not understand the belt of wampum, and knows not the tongue of the Oneida." "I can find means," said Walter, taking from the pouch he carried a pencil and an old pocket-book. "But where will thy messenger find him, my father?" "He is not far," answered the chief. "He sailed today from the midday toward the cold wind, with the war party of the English. I watched them from the Black Mountains, and they are a mighty people. They floated on Horicon like a string of swans, and their number upon the blue waters was like a flight of passage pigeons upon the sky when they travel westward. They landed where the earth becomes a lizard, by the rattlesnake dens. But how long they may tarry, who shall say? Send quickly, then." Walter had been writing on his knee while the chief spoke, and the brief note, which we have already seen delivered, was speedily finished. A messenger was then chosen for his swiftness of foot, and dispatched at once to the point where the English army first landed. When he returned, all was still amongst the Oneidas, and the warriors, with but few exceptions, were sleeping in the long grass. The news he brought, however, soon roused the drowsiest. The English flotilla had gone on, he said. He had found but a solitary canoe with a few Mohawks, who told him that the battle would be on the following morning. Every warrior was on his feet in a moment. Their light baggage and arms were snatched up in haste. One party was detached to the east to watch the movements of the army. Another messenger was chosen and sent to bear the letter, and ere half an hour had gone by, the dusky bands were once more moving silently through the dark paths of the forest, only lighted from time to time by glimpses of the moon, and directed by the well-known stars which had so often guided their fathers through the boundless wilderness. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of Ticonderoga by George Payne Rainsford James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 35. Calm and bright and beautiful, the Sabbath morning broke over the woody world around Edith Prevost. Through the tall pine trees left standing within the earthworks, the rosy light streamed sweetly, and though no birds deserving the name of songsters inhabit the forests of America, yet many a sweet short note saluted the rising day. Edith, with her good negro woman lying near, had slept more soundly than she had hoped for, but she was awake with the first ray, and rousing her dark companion, she said, "We must not forget that this is Sunday, Bab. Call in our good friend Woodchuck, and we will pray before all the noise and bustle of the day begins. I am sure he will be glad to do so." "But you have no book, missy," answered the woman. "That matters not," said the beautiful girl. "I know almost all the prayers by heart, from reading them constantly." Sister Bab opened the little hurdle door and looked round. She could not see the person she sought. 3 sentinels were pacing to and fro at different points. One man was rousing himself slowly from the side of an extinguished fire, but all the rest within sight were fast asleep. It was useless for Sister Bab to ask the neighbouring sentinel any questions, and she looked round in vain. "He has most likely gone to sleep in one of the huts," said Edith, when the woman told her Woodchuck was not to be seen. "We will not wait for him." And closing the door again, she knelt and prayed with the poor negress by her side. It was a great comfort to her, for her heart that day was sad, perhaps from the memory of many a Sabbath with those she loved, and the contrast of those days with her situation at the time; perhaps from the uncertainty of her brother's fate, and doubtless too she thought that every rising sun brought nearer the hour when a parent and a lover were to be exposed to danger, perhaps to death, had its weight likewise. But she was that day very sad, and prayer was a relief, a blessing. Before she had concluded, a good deal of noise and turmoil was heard without, voices speaking sharply, calls such as Edith had not heard before, and in a moment after the door of the hut opened, for it had no latch, and Monsieur le Comtois appeared, inquiring if she had seen anything of her English companion. "No, indeed," replied Edith. "I sent my servant out to seek for him half an hour ago, but she could not find him, and I concluded he was in one of the huts. The Frenchman stamped his foot upon the ground, and, forgetting his usual politeness, uttered some hasty and angry words, implying a belief that Edith knew very well where Woodchuck was, and had aided his escape. The beautiful girl drew herself up with an air of dignity, and replied, "You make me feel, sir, that I am a prisoner, but you mistake me greatly. I do not permit myself to speak falsely on any occasion. If he has escaped you, and I trust he has, I knew nothing of it." "I beg your pardon, mademoiselle," replied the officer, "but this to me is a very serious matter. I may be subjected to the severest military punishment for this unfortunate affair. It was of the utmost importance that the existence of this post should be kept a secret. The utmost precautions have been taken to keep its existence concealed, even from the forces in Fort Carillon. And now this man is at large, to bear the intelligence to the enemy. This must excuse a little heat. How he has escaped it is impossible to divine, for I ordered him to be kept in sight by the sentinels continually, as well as the Indians who came with you. He must be worse than an Indian, for they are all safe and quiet enough, but he has disappeared, though the sentinel swears he passed him sleeping on the ground under the great pine tree not an hour ago." "Half an hour ago he certainly was gone," replied Edith, "for the servant went to look for him and could not find him." "He may be still in the bushes," said the French officer. "I will send out a party to search," and he turned from the door of the hut. Edith followed a step or two to see the result, but hardly had Monsieur le Comtois given his orders, in obedience to which about a dozen men issued forth, some clambering over the breastworks, some running round by the flanks, when a French officer, brilliantly dressed, rode into the redoubt, followed by a mounted soldier, and Edith retired into the hut again. Le Comtois saluted the newcomer reverently, and the other gave a hasty glance around, saying, "Get your men under arms as speedily as possible. On the maintenance of this post and the 2 abattis depends the safety of the fortress. I trust, then, to the honour of French gentlemen and the faith of our Indian allies. Neither will tarnish the glory of France or their own renown by yielding a foot of ground while they can maintain it." He spoke aloud, so as to make his voice heard all over the enclosure, and then, bending down his head till it was close to Le Comtois' ear, he added in a low tone, almost a whisper, "The English are within sight. Their first boats are disembarking the troops. Monsieur de Levis, with our reinforcements, has not appeared. All depends upon maintaining the outpost till he can come up. This, sir, I trust to you with full confidence, as a brave man and an experienced soldier. I must now visit the other posts. Farewell. Remember, the glory of France is in your hands." Thus saying, he rode away, and the bustle of instant preparation spread through the little fort. The French soldiers were drawn up within the breastworks, and the stores and ammunition gathered together near the centre of the open space, so as to be readily available whenever they were wanted. 2 parties of Hurons were placed upon the flanks, so as to be ready to rush out with the tomahawk the moment opportunity offered. Next came the long lines of French muskets, and in the centre of the longest face of the breastwork were placed Apuqua and his companions, with their rifles in their hands, and a small party of French soldiers forming a second line behind them, thus ensuring their faith, and rendering the fire from the centre more fierce. Their presence, indeed, was needed at the moment, for the men who had been sent out in pursuit of Woodchuck had either mistaken the order not to go far, or had lost their way, and they had not reappeared when the whole preparations were complete. These had occupied some time, although Monsieur le Comtois had shown all the activity and precision of a thorough soldier, giving his orders rapidly, but coolly and clearly, and correcting every error as soon as made. The Indians, indeed, gave him the greatest embarrassment, for they were too eager for the fight, and, never subjected to military discipline, were running hither and thither to the points they thought most advantageous, without consideration of the general arrangements. The Frenchman found time, however, for a few courteous words to Edith. "I am greatly embarrassed, my dear young lady," he said, "by your presence here, as we expect to be attacked every instant. I wish to heaven Monsieur de Montcalm had taken you away with him, but in the hurry of the moment I did not think of it, and I have no means of sending you away now. And besides, the risk to yourself would be still greater than staying here. I believe you are as safely posted in this hut as anywhere. It is near enough to the breastwork to be protected from the fire of the enemy, but you may as well lie down upon the bearskin if you hear musketry." "Could I not place myself actually under the breastwork?" asked Edith, remembering the instructions sent to her. "Impossible," replied the officer. "That space is all occupied by the soldiers and Indians. You are better here. If we should be driven back, which God forbid, you will be safe, as you speak English and can say who you are. But remember, address yourself to an officer, for the canaille get mad in time of battle, and on no account trust an Indian." "I speak the Iroquois tongue," answered Edith. "My dear young lady, there is no trusting them," said the officer. "Friends or enemies are the same to them when their blood's hot. All they want is a scalp, and that they will have. It would be terrible to see your beautiful tresses hanging at an Indian's belt." As he spoke, one of the men who had been sent forth after Woodchuck came running up, exclaiming, "They are coming, mon capitaine! They are coming!" "Who?" demanded Lecomptois briefly. "The redcoats, the English," said the man. "I saw their advance guard with my own eyes. They are not 200 yards distant." "Where are your companions?" asked Lecomptois. "We want every musket." "I don't know," answered the man. "They have lost their way, I fancy, as I did. I saw 2 amongst the bushes just in front, trying to get back." "Sacre Dieu! They will discover us," said the captain, and running forward, he jumped upon the parapet just behind one of the highest bushes, and looked over. The next instant he sprang down again, saying in a low tone to the corporal near him, "Stand to your arms. Present. Pass the word along, not to fire, whatever you see, till I give the order." At the same moment he made a sign with his hand to the renegade Oneidas, but probably they did not see it, for their keen black eyes were all eagerly bent forward, peeping through the bushes, which now seemed agitated at some little distance. A moment after, a straggling shot or 2 was heard, and instantly the Honocto fired. The order was then given by Lecomptois, and the whole front poured forth a volley, which was returned by a number of irregular shots, blazing out of the bushes in front. Then succeeded a silence of a few moments, and then a loud cheer, such as none but Anglo-Saxon lungs have ever given. Edith sat, deathly pale and trembling, in the hut, but it is not too much to say that but a small portion of her terror was for herself. The battle had begun, the battle in which father and lover were to risk life, in which, amidst all the human beings destined to bleed and die that day, her love singled out 2, while her fancy painted them as the aim of every shot. It was them she thought, much more than of herself. The door of the hut was turned, as I have shown, toward the inside of the square, and Captain Lecomptois had left it open behind him. Thus, as Edith sat a little toward one side of the entrance, she had a view of one side of the redoubt, along which were posted a few French soldiers and a considerable body of Hurons. The firing was soon resumed, but in a somewhat different manner from before. There were no longer any volleys, but frequent, repeated, almost incessant shots, sometimes 2 or 3 together, making almost one sound. Thrice she saw a French soldier carried across the open space and laid down at the foot of a tree. One remained quite still where he had been placed, one raised himself for a moment upon his arm, and then sank down again, and Edith understood the signs full well. Clouds of bluish-white smoke then began to roll over the redoubt and curl along as the very gentle wind carried it towards the broad trail by which she had been brought thither. The figures of the Indians became indistinct, and looked like beings seen in a dream. But still the firing continued, drawing apparently more toward the western side. Still the rattle of the musketry was mingled with loud cheers from without. But suddenly those sounds were crossed, as it were, by a wild yell such as Edith had only heard once in her life before, but which now seemed to issue from 1,000 throats instead of a few. It came from the northwest, right in the direction of the broad trail. The French soldiers and the Hurons, who had been kneeling to fire over the breastwork, sprang upon their feet, looked round, and from that side too burst forth at once the war-whoop. "Oh, Missy, Missy, let us run!" cried Sister Bab, catching Edith's wrist. "Hush, hush, be quiet," said the young lady. "These may be friends coming." As she spoke, pouring on like a dark torrent, was seen a crowd of dusky forms rushing along the trail, emerging from amongst the trees, spreading rapidly over the ground, and amidst them all, a tall youth, equipped like an Indian, and mounted on a grey horse, which Edith recognised as her own. The sight confused and dazzled her. Feathers and plumes and war paints, rifles and tomahawks and knives, grim countenances and brandished arms, swam before her like the things that fancy sees for a moment in a cloud, while still the awful war-whoop rang horribly around, drowning even the rattle of the musketry, and seeming to rend the ear. Two figures only were distinct, the youth upon the horse, and the towering figure of Black Eagle himself close to the lad's side. Attacked in flank and front and rear, the French and Hurons were broken in a moment, driven from the breastworks, beaten back into the centre of the square, and separated into detached bodies. But still they fought with desperation, still the rifles and the muskets pealed, still the cheer and the shout and the war-whoop resounded on the air. A large party of the French soldiery were cast between the huts and the Oneidas, and the young man on the horse strove in vain, tomahawk in hand, to force his way through. But there are episodes in all combats, and even a pause took place when the gigantic Huron chief rushed furiously against the Black Eagle. It may be that they were ancient enemies, but, at all events, each seemed animated with the fury of a fiend. Each cast away his rifle and betook himself to the peculiar weapons of his race, the knife and the tomahawk. But it was impossible to describe, it was almost impossible to see the two combatants, such was their marvellous rapidity. Now here, now there, they turned, the blows seeming to fall like hail, the limbs writhing and twisting, the weapons whirling and flashing round. Each was the giant of his tribe, each its most renowned warrior, and each fought for more than life, the closing act of a great renown. But the sinewy frame of the Black Eagle seemed to prevail over the more bulky strength of his opponent. The Huron lost ground. He was driven back to the great pine tree near the centre of the square. He was forced round and round it. The knife of the Black Eagle drank his blood, but missed his heart, and only wounded him in the shoulder. Those nearest the scene had actually paused for a moment in the contest to witness the fierce single combat going on. But in other parts of the square the bloody fight was still continued. For an instant the French party in the front of the huts, by desperate efforts, seemed likely to overpower the Oneidas before them. A tall French grenadier bayoneted the Nighthawk before Edith's eyes, and then, seeing the great Huron chief staggering under the blows of his enemy, he dashed forward, and not daring in the rapid whirls of the two combatants to use his bayonet there, he struck the Black Eagle on the head with the butt of his musket. The blow fell with tremendous force and drove the old chief to his knee, with one hand upon the ground. His career seemed over, his fate finished. The Huron raised his tomahawk high to strike. The Frenchman shortened his musket to pin the Black Eagle to the earth. But at that moment a broad, powerful figure dropped down at once from the branches of the pine tree above, between the Oneida and the grenadier, bent slightly with his fall, but even in rising, lifted a rifle to his shoulder and sent the ball into the Frenchman's heart. With a yell of triumph, Black Eagle sprang up from the ground, and in an instant his tomahawk was buried in the undefended head of his adversary. Edith beheld not the close of the combat, for in the swaying to and fro of the fierce struggle, the French soldiery had by this time been driven past the huts, and the eye of one who loved her was upon her. "Edith! Edith!" cried the voice of Walter Prevost, forcing the horse forward through the struggling groups, amid shots and shouts and falling blows. She saw him, she recognised him, she stretched forth her arms toward him, and dashing between the two parties, Walter forced the horse up to the door of the hut and caught her hand. Spring up, he cried, bending down, and casting his arm around her. "This is not half over, I must carry you away." Partly lifted, partly leaping from the ground, Edith sprang up before him, and, holding her tightly to his heart, Walter turned the rein and dashed away, through fens and enemies, trampling, unconscious of what he did, alike on the dead and the dying. The western side of the square was crowded with combatants, and he directed his horse's head toward the east, reached the angle, and turned sharp round to get in the rear of the English column, which was seen forcing its way onward to support the advance party of Major Putnam. He thought only of his sister, and pressing her closer to his heart, he said, "We are safe, Edith, we are safe." Alas, he spoke too soon. There had been one group in the square that stood almost aloof from the combat. Gathered together in the southeastern angle, Apukwa and his companions seemed watching an opportunity for flight, but their fierce eyes had seen Walter, and twice had a rifle been discharged at him from that spot, but without effect. They saw him snatch his sister from the hut, place her on the horse, and gallop round. Apukwa, the brother of the snake, and 2 others jumped upon the parapet, and scarcely had he uttered the words, "We are safe," when the fire blazed at once from the muzzles of their rifles. One ball whistled by his ear, and another passed through his hair, but clasping Edith somewhat closer, he galloped on, and in 2 minutes after came to a spot where 3 or 4 men were standing, and one kneeling, with his hand under the head of a British officer who had fallen. Walter reined up the horse sharply, for he was almost over them before he saw them. But the sight of the features of the dead man drew from his lips the sudden exclamation of, "Good God!" They were those of Lord H. Edith's face, as Walter held her, had been turned toward him, and he fancied that she rested her forehead on his bosom to shut out the terrible sights around. Her forehead was resting there still, but over the arm that held her so closely to his heart, Walter saw welling a dark red stream of blood. He trembled like a leaf. "Edith!" he said. "Edith!" There was no answer. He pushed the bright brown curls back from her forehead, and as he did so, the head fell back, showing the face as pale as marble. She had died without a cry, without a sound. Walter bent his head and kissed her cheek and wept. "What is the matter, sir?" said the surgeon, rising from beside the body of Lord H. "Did you know my lord?" "Look here," said Walter. It was all he said, but in an instant they gathered round him, and lifted Edith from the horse. The surgeon put his hand upon the wrist, then shook his head sadly, and they laid her gently by the side of Lord H. They did not know with how much propriety, but thus she would have loved to rest. Thus they met, and thus they parted. Thus they loved, and thus they died. But in one thing they were happy, that neither at their last hour knew the other's peril or the other's fate. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of Ticonderoga by George Payne Rainsford James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 36. From the bloody field of Ticonderoga, Abercrombie retreated, as is well known, after having in vain attempted to take the inner abattis without cannon, and sacrificed the lives of many hundred gallant men to his own want of self-reliance. I need dwell no more upon the painful subject, but it was a sad day for the whole army, a sad day for the whole province, and a sadder day still for one small domestic circle, when the bodies of the gallant Lord H. and his beautiful promised bride were brought to rest for a night at the house of Mr. Prevost, before they were moved down to Albany. A body of the young nobleman's own regiment carried the coffins by turns. Another party followed with arms reversed. But between the biers and the escort walked 4 men, with hearts as sad as any upon earth. It may seem strange, but none of the 4 shed a tear. The tall Indian warrior, though he grieved as much as if he had lost a child, had no tears for any earthly sorrow. The fountain in the heart of Mr. Prevost had been dried up by the fiery intensity of his grief. Walter had wept long and secretly, and the pride of manhood would not let him stain his cheeks in the presence of soldiers. Woodchuck's eyes were dry too, for during 6 long months he had disciplined his heart to look upon the things of the earth so lightly, that although he grieved for Edith's fate, it was with the sort of sorrow he might have felt to see a beautiful flower trampled down by a rough foot. And there was bright hope, too, mingled with the shadow of his woe, for he said to himself frequently, They have but parted for to-day, to meet in a happier place to-morrow. As the procession approached the house, the servants came forth to meet it, with a young and beautiful girl at their head, clad in the Indian garb. She bore 2 little wreaths in her hand, one woven of bright spring flowers, the other of dark evergreens, and when the soldiers halted for a moment with their burden, she laid the flowers upon the coffin of Edith, and the evergreen upon the soldier's bier. Then, turning, with the tears dropping from her eyes, but with no clamorous grief, she walked before them back into the house. Some 4 years after, a less painful scene might be beheld at the house of Mr. Prevost. He himself sat in a great chair under the verandah, with his hair become as white as snow, and his head a good deal bowed. Seated on the ground near him was a tall Indian chief, very little changed in appearance, grave, calm, and still as ever. On the step of the verandah sat 2 young people, a tall, handsome, powerful man of about 21, and a beautiful girl whose brown cheek betrayed some mixture of the Indian blood. On the green grass before them, with a black nurse sitting by, was as lovely a child of about 2 years of age as ever the sun shone upon. They had gathered a number of beautiful flowers, and she was sporting them with the grace and with the happiness that only children can display or know. The eyes of all were fixed upon her, and they called her Edith. There was one wanting to that party out of those who had assembled at the door 4 years before. Woodchuck was no longer there. He had gone where he longed to be. When he felt sickness coming upon him, some 2 years after the death of Lord H., he had left the house of Mr. Prevost, which he had lately made his home, and gone, as he said, to wander in the mountains. There he became worse. An Indian runner came down to tell his friends that he was dying, and when Mr. Prevost went up to see him, he found him in a Seneca lodge, with but a few hours of life before him. Woodchuck was very glad to see the friendly face near him, and as his visitor bent over him, he said, "I am very much obliged to you for coming, Prevost, for I want to ask you one thing, and that is, to have me buried in the churchyard at Albany, just beside your dear girl. I know it's all nonsense, and that the flesh sees corruption, but still I've a fancy that I shall rest quieter there than anywhere else. If ever there was an angel, she was one, and I think her dust must sanctify the ground." It was his only request, and it was not forgotten. End of chapter 36. End of Ticonderoga, a story of early frontier life in the Mohawk Valley, by George Payne Rainsford James.